Okay, we're back. Part 2 in our series on creating a show manager in Google Sheets for all our TV shows. In our previous tutorial, we got our API key from the TMDB Data API, and then we created the first part of our API, which you can find in here with our API interface, that allowed us to search for any TV show that we want in our region. So basically, we had Mr. Robot as an example. We hit run, reaches out to our API, and here we are. Perfect. We've got all the details that we needed. We filtered it down into more relevant information that we needed. So later on, we can display that information into a cool little UI like I have here. And type in Mr. Robot. And our little search comes up here that we can now add into our shows list if we want. All right, so once we have our show information, it looks a little bit like this. Now there's some bits and pieces missing from the show that we need to add in. So for example, on our list here, we need the season episodes and we need the providers list as well. And we currently can't draw that from the initial show selection API. It just gives us some basic information here. So once we decide on a show with the ID, we need to find that extra info. That's where we're at. Now, if you are playing along, you've already got a copy of the sheet to work from with your API key in it. But if you're starting from this point in time, there is a copy of the starter sheet for this second session in the link in the description below. You'll just have to put in your API key that you will have to get from the TMDB before you can begin. So let's get into some clicky clacky, eh? So back to our API interface, and our main task today is to get the show by its ID. So in our API, we've currently got this information here. So we've got our shows API and our basic API info up here. We've got our send request to URL fetch app to draw a bunch of API requests using URL fetch all here. And then each one of these methods inside our function are going to call the API. So the first one we built together was a search shows. Now there's going to be two instances where we want to get a show by its ID. First one is when we've selected a show like we did in our little test here. And we run this and we're going to grab this show and go, okay, I've chosen this one and we want to put an individual one into our show list. Or when we're trying to update our shows. So let's just bring this back here. If I want to update my shows, I'm going to go to manage update season episodes, and it's going to get this season episode data and update the providers, the last air date, etc. So it's going to grab a bunch of them. So we want to create our API to make two calls, two different types of calls. One is going to be the getShowById and then getShowsById. So one is singular, the other one is plural. Okay, and that's just going to make it easier for us in future if we want to expand on this app and create new functionality, then we can access this a bit more quickly. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into that, eh? So the first one we want is the public API, I'm going to call, because that's what's getting returned in this function here, this quasi class. So public API dot, and we're going to say get show by ID, and that's going to be equal to a function. And when I'm doing methods, I usually like the type out function instead of having the shorthand approach. So I'll say show ID, it just makes it clearer when you're looking and reviewing the code. And it's going to take a show ID that we're going to retrieve and get all the information we want from it. Now, this method is going to be super simple. So all it's going to do is return this. So this is the current class we're working in, this quasi class function. And it's going to ask for the get all shows by ID link. And inside that, it's going to call that function. And because it's plural, it's going to be in an array. And it's going to be an array of just this one show ID. And from that, we want to pull out the first array item. So it's going to be the 0th array item of the show ID. So let's add in some comments there. So what's up next? So now we actually need to build the more important of the two, which is our public API again, get, so it's this bad boy up here, isn't it? So we'll just copy it, pasting, Think. Oh, we're not doing that. Sorry. And then we'll say equals function. And this is going to take in an array of show IDs. So show IDs. And let's just add in some comments here to explain what we want. Cool. We've got our little JS doc sorted out now. So it retrieves it retrieves an array of all show data and provider data of all shows. There we go. Nice. And it takes a parameter, which is a string containing the show ID in an array. So that's what this symbol means here. And it's going to return an array of shows API responses. So I'll explain the same here, but remember in our previous tutorial, we created a type definition explaining what show API responses is, which contains a error property of an object and a response property of an object. That's what we're returning. Nice. So the first thing we need to do is validate the show IDs array. Now these are going to be numbers, not strings, like I said earlier, and we need to first validate if the parameter that's being inputted is an array and if it has a length greater than 0. Okay, so validate show IDs array. And then we'll say if is not an array dot is array, and then we'll say show IDs, this one here. So if it's not an array, then it's going to do the thing below. Or if the show IDs dot length is equal to 0, we also want to throw an error, don't we? So that error is going to go into our show's API response in the ERR property. So return an array, of course. So this is for each one. And then we'll say error, colon, invalid, or empty show IDs array. Okay, our response is going to be nothing. Resp is going to be equal to an empty object. And I think that's done. Looks good. Cool, nanas. Let's bring that up a little bit. Excellent. We'll check every item in the array to see if it is a number. If, and we can go if the show IDs, and here we can use the JavaScript every method. So it means like everything here has to contain something, contain whatever is inside every. So is, ID, and little arrow function here, number, dot is integer, put in the ID. And so if it is number and ID is greater than 0, that's pretty good. So then if it fails that test, we want to return a similar error. I'm going to do this again. So we'll go bink ERR all show IDs must be positive whole number. Yeah, that's pretty clear, isn't it? And our response is that. All right, cool. Good. Next. So now we need to set up our array of requests that we're going to make. It's going to be equal to this. And we probably want a timestamp of the period in which we made this request as well. So if you have a look at our shows here, remember we're trying to build this out at some stage. So over here, we've got a last checked. So that's probably what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go const timestamp is equal to a new date. Bink. So now we need to make two different types of requests. So if we go back to our sheet here, so we need to make a request on an item to get the list of episodes, the last episode that's available, the last aired date, and then we also are going to need the providers list as well, so we can see who we need to subscribe to. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So we can go, so this section will be like prepare requests, and then the first thing we're going to do is actually prepare the request. and we're going to grab our show IDs and iterate over each one. So for each, okay, and that'll eventually fill out this request array up the top here. So for each show ID, we want to have a look inside. All right, so our first one, so we need 2 requests for each show ID. So for that, we need to have a look at the TMD database to see what requests or the shape of the request URL that we need to make. So we're looking in TV series, we probably need maybe the details one and the series ID. So we generated a series ID. Let's go and have a look at our test and run that. Let's give it a quick run. Pull big API. Okay, we did something silly there. Let's go back. 118 says this one. Yeah, let's see. Okay, now we're cooking. Back to our test run. Okay, so this is our ID here. Now, I probably recommend you make a copy of this. We could probably make a copy of this here and go back. This is down. And you could put this in this example now, just replace this one. Okay, so now we've got this detail here. I'm going to go back to the API side here and whack that in. All right, so we can see that we can search for our shows with this URL pathway here. And you can set the language if you want, but it's going to be this language by default. So I believe if we get rid of that, it's not going to matter. So I'm going to just grab this for the time being and head back to our code. Okay, cool. I'm just going to whack that there for the time for a second, and that will be our first request, right? So we're going to say const request 1 equals, and we're going to assign our options that we created up here to a new object of requests. So we'll say object assign, and that's going to be an empty array and our options. And then we also need to create our request URL. So requests1.url is going to be equal to, let's make this a string here, and it's going to have our API base URL, which is over here, this one. And I actually think we put that in up here, API base URL. So this will be that here. And then I'm wondering if we even need this 3 here. A little curious about that. It might be the version, perhaps, but I think we'll try it without the 3 for the time being. Let's put the TV in. And then we want the show ID. Show ID, which is going to replace this here. Okay, if you get stuck, we'll add this in a minute. I'm just going to comment that out. Okay, so our second request number 2, object dot sign options request 2 dot URL. So before we dive into that, I didn't really explain why we're diving into the first base request. So if we have a look at our TV data, we can scroll down last episode air to air and the last air date, which is important because it helps us know if the show has been completed or not. Gives us a list of networks, which might be handy, but it also gives us a list of seasons and episodes, which is exactly what we're trying to hunt for. So here's kind of important. And this next one is going to get our list of providers. So let's have a look at our providers. And I think providers here, watch providers. So let's go back. Let's put this in a new tab. Okay, so this is going to give us a list of providers by country, which is exactly what we're after. So we're in Australia, but you can choose, we'll be able to custom select which one you want and see who the providers are. Awesome. Okay, so let's head back to our code. So the URL for our providers list is going to look like this. Our TV series ID in there, which is we'll just put the sample in there so we know what we got. Let's do this one. Okay. Input field is here. There we go. Yep, cool. And just thinking about it now, that 3 is probably the version number. So 3. So we could probably put that in there. Not sure if I did with the previous one. You could have a look. Okay, so comment that out. So we've got a path And this one is going to be similar. Why not? Let's do that. 3. Okay, so let's go. Oh, we've got our backticks in here. $, curly braces, our API base URL. Just copy this in, copy this here, copy. I think just the endpoint changes, right? So it's the base URL, 3 TVs, show ID, and we just want to add this watch providers to it. Something naughty has occurred. So now we've got these together, let's push this into our requests, which is this one. So we'll say requests dot push on each iteration. That's going to push our request 1 and 2. Request 1, request 2. Nice. Cool. And now we can say const response. So we want the responses from that request now. So responses, plural, is equal to send requests. Okay, and we're going to plug in our requests. Sweet. Alrighty. So far, so good. So this is going to go to our send request, which we generated in our first tutorial, which is up here. And that's actually going to go and reach out to the API and get the information that we need. So we could probably return that for now and run a little test, perhaps. So we could say function test. Let's test. Go back up here. I suppose we could test this one, hey? That, and that. So we're going to say shows ID or show ID is equal to, and we'll use that Mr. Robot one we got earlier, hey? Which is this 62560. Nice. And now we're going to get the const response equal to shows API function, and we want the getShowsById. It tells us that we need a show number. Great, that's working. Show ID. Nice. And let's console log the JSON.stringify the response as null base. Okay, let's see how we went. getShowsById. Access area 404. Could not be found. Maybe it's that pesky 3 in there. What do you reckon? If I remove that and I remove this, hit save and go back to our test and run. Okay, so we know for some reason we can't get that version 3 thing working. So without the version 3, excellent. This is a web of lies. Do not use. Just take out that 3 and you're golden. Okay, so let's have a look at our object. So there's no errors. It iterated through. It's got a response here. So this is, we've got some details of it. We've got the episode runtime, first aired date, the genres, homepage information, last aired date, last episode to air, the name, network IDs, number of episodes. This is great. Production companies, yawn. Seasons, episode count. Okay, another season there, season 3 details. That's pretty cool. And then I think that's all of it. You know what, right now, because what we're going to do is merge everything together. And this is just showing the 0th entity of the array. And there's 2 items in the array. Let's just put this in another array for the time being, because we're testing. And we'll head back to our test and run. Okay, so now we've got 2 items. That's looking pretty good. And then we could split that. Response for each response. We're getting quite short here. Extra. Take it out of the console log. Put the console log inside here. Okay, cool. Awesome. We should have 2 instances here. First one contains, all the basic information about our show. Excellent. And the next one contains all the locations. So A, AL, AT, we're getting close to what we need. AU, Sorry, gang, we're probably going to run out before we get to GB or US or something like that, or SA. Yes, but that's okay. You understand the gist. All right, so let's head back to our API interface. First stage, success. So we need to refine this red hot mess of object data into something that we want to display on a sheet. So we don't need to have all that information. Let's make a note here first. So send. Cool. And then our next note is going to be build the response objects for the array of shows. And this is going to be, I will say const shows array object. OBJ is okay. Equal to an empty array for now. But we're going to now, at the end of this method, return that shows array object. Cool. Now, because every time when we return this, we're going to have a bunch of IDs perhaps, or just one set of IDs. We're going to iterate over two sets. So the first set is just going to be this standard bunch of data that we had in execution logs. And then we've got the providers data. So as we iterate, we're going to jump a position for our iteration. So what do I mean by this? Well, let me show you. Good question. Let me show you. Okay, so let's create a for loop and we'll say let I is equal to 0, semicolon, I is less than the response length, so resp dot length, and then we're going to go I plus equals 2 instead of plus plus, which is standard, because we're going to jump over this one to the next one. Cool. So let's go const, we'll check for errors. So we'll say error combo. So errors combo is equal to this, and that's going to, we'll spread out our responses, responses dot I dot error, or empty if there's no errors. But then also we want to check the errors for the provider as well, right? So this first one is going to be just a standard search for this one, but also we're going to look at, so let's go, we'll spread these errors out, responses, okay, dot I plus 1 is error, or it's also blank. We had no errors. Now we can say if our error combo length is greater than 0, then we want to ignore everything else in this loop. So errors combo dot length is greater than 0. Then we just want to add it to our shows array. So shows array object dot push, and that's going to contain our, this one, shows array push, it's going to contain our errors. So object of our errors. So errors dot errors combo, and then our response is going to be empty object, and then that's updated. Cool. And then for that item in the iteration, we want to continue to the next set. Cool. All right. So if there's no errors, then we want to build the object. Okay, so we can go const shows is equal to the response, responses I, and it'll be the response, because we know that's going to be what is contained when it's returned from the send request. Okay, and then we want to grab our providers information too. So this is going to be const providers is equal to responses dot I plus 1 dot response. And we need to have a look at our execution log again in our providers. What are we looking for? So the response, and then we want the results in that response. And then we want it by country, which is this AU here. Okay. So what do we say? Results. And so response, results, country. Got it. Okay, so response. I can put a question mark here to let it fail, just in case. Results, pink. And then the country. Now, we could just say AU for Australia. Where is it? Is that you? Yeah. Yeah. But what if you're not in Australia? What if you're in the States or UK, Canada? So let's be a bit more helpful here. Let's change this. What we're going to do is put this in here, and we're going to make a reference to the API provider country. So I'm going to go to our code here. So we've got API, and let's add another enumerator called provider country. Underscore country. And that's going to be equal to our, for us, that'll be equal to AU. Oi. Nice. So if we do move overseas again, we can just change that, can't we? Okay, so now we can reference this. So refs.api.provider country. Cool. And perhaps later down the track, we might have a user interface where they have a setup stage and they just copy and paste in their API key and select their country of preference and hit submit, and that's stored perhaps in the property service. And then we can use this to draw that from the property service. Cool nanas. Okay, so we've got our shows and our providers. If that doesn't exist, we'll say, or it's blank. And now we need to get the season episode array from the shows. So what I mean by that is we want to get an array of all the seasons in the episode. Okay, so let's go const season episode array. It's going to be equal to, and now we're going to create a internal private function for this. Good place probably to put this is just about here. So function, it's going to be called get season episode array, and that's going to take the seasons that we are going to find and do a bunch of cool stuff, and it's going to return an array of episodes. So we'll come back to him in a minute. Okay, so we'll say get season episode array, and that's going to take our shows data, but shows response. So let's have a look at execution log again. So response, and we want seasons. Seasons here, look. Cool. And we'll be able to iterate over these to find the season number and the episode count so we can plug in those seasons properly. All right, so let's go do that. And so there'll be, oh, sorry, what was it? Execution log. So seasons is our next thing we need to say. Cool, got it. Shows seasons. Nice. Okay, so let's create this function before we do a little bit more testing. Cool. What do we need? Seasons. Okay, so let's put in some JS doc. Okay, what are we creating? It retrieves an array of episodes by seasons in the following format. So season 01 E03. So you're probably quite familiar with this format. So it's going to take in an object called seasons that we've brought in, and this object has a season number. So we should actually be saying season. So we know the object, we want to get the season number in the episode account, I think. So if we go back to seasons here, I want the season number. So we're grabbing this and the episode count. And we need to fix up our JS doc here to describe that. So we want seasons. This has to come in to say it's in an array. And let's just update this one as well. Cool. And then it's going to return a string, an array of episodes, which is like this. Okay, so maybe let's just console.log seasons for now, just to see what we got. We can run our test, but we don't really need to do this. Let's do it. Okay, 174. Oh, these are responses, plural. Do we do any other silliness? No. So of course you can do your user debugger, which is probably even more helpful, but because I've got my API key in here, unfortunately for this series, I can't do it that way. Okay, how we going? Conol, never a good approach. Okay, so save, test, run. All right, cool. So this is our list of seasons. So we need to iterate over an array and grab the season number and the episode count. Now, so oftentimes you get a season number 0 and it might contain like full list of all episodes in the entire series. Or sometimes season 0 could be just like the first season. So just figure it out, make a decision on which way you want to go. I keep in the zeros, it's no biggie for me. All right, so we need to iterate over these, grab these two, and then work out our season count. Nice. Let's go back and continue on. Okay, so we're going to use the reduce method for this. So we're going to return reduce. We're going to return seasons dot, and then we'll reduce that here. And we need an accumulator. And then for each season, I don't think we need an index for this one. Do a little arrow function. Nice. Remember, with your reduce, you need to say how you want it to start. Down the bottom here, we want to start with an empty array. Cool. And now our season numbers, if we had a look at our execution log here, are typical, right? So they're 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But we want to, if it's only got one digit and not a second digit, like 10, for example, we want to add an extra 0 in there. Couple ways of doing this. Let's just keep it simple. We will say const season number is equal to season dot season number. If it's less than 10, then let's use a ternary operator and say if it's less than 10, we're going to plug in a 0 to the start of it plus season dot season number. But if it's not less than 10, we're just going to convert it to a string because that's what we want. And it's going to be season dot season number, and it's done. Now I can't picture a time where a season is going to go greater than 100, unless it's like The Simpsons in another 30 years. So this should suffice. Okay, cool. So next we need to grab the episode count. So if we go const, it's looks like this, has this shape to it. So episode count is equal to season dot episode count. Right, and what do we need to do the episode count? Well, we need to create an array from the episode count. So we've got this funky little array here that we can iterate through or scroll through on our sheet. Okay, so let's go const episode array, and then we're going to create an array. So array.from, and let's do some cool stuff. Let's create an object. So we want to set the length of the array to be the episode count. And then put a little underscore comma in here, index. Okay, so the second part of our array from is a mapping function. And we don't need the first argument, which is the item. We just need the index. So we're going to use that. We want to say arrow. And now we need to get the episode number. So const episode num is equal to the index plus 1. If it's less than 10, we want to add a 0 to it to fill it out. Plus the, let's make it like we did up here so it looks the same, nice and neat and tidy, eh? So do that. Plus, so we're going to add the number. So if it's less than 10, we'll add a 0. We'll add the index plus 1. If it's not less than 10, we'll just convert it to a string. And then we'll add the index plus 1. Nice. That's clear, isn't it? Okay, and then we're going to return now this to the array as it's being built. So we'll say we want the season, so S for season, then we'll do our $ curly braces, and we will put in the season number, so this one here, bink, and then we want the episode with a capital E, $ curly braces, and put in our new episode number, bink and bink. We are rock and roll. Now, if the episodes get greater than 100, cool bananas, do whatever you want. It'll become 100. And I think that's cool, but we're still, so that's our episode array generated. But so now that's on one iteration of the season. So we need the second season. We need to plug this in. So keep building this out. So what we need to do here is then go accumulator. So the accumulator is now equal to the accumulator.concatenate the episode array, and then we're going to return that accumulator. Nice. Okay, save. Let's see how we went. So we'll console log this now. Season episode array, save. Go to our test, runzo. Hey, look, seasons. So 0 season, season 1, all the episodes through, season 2, 3, 4. Perfect. This is looking phantasmagorical. Now we also need to get the providers. So let's go const. So the providers are the people who are hosting the show. And we're probably going to set the providers up in a string so they look a little like this. So if they're free, they're by flat rate ads, and then we're going to plug them in with a separation by a pipe. And then if it's not in the B category, it'll be returned and put it in the next category and so on. So let's go ahead and do that. So providers is going to be equal to, let's create a new helper function now called getProviders. Okay, providers here. And guess what? I'm going to grab this and put that in there. We're good. And when we're done, we'll console log it. Just to test him out, eh? Providers. Oh, we can't call it providers. It's 2 constants. Providers string, we'll call it. There we go. Super explicit. Okay, let's create this function. Back up here. Function. Get provided. Whoop, fun. Puts the fun in function. Now we're cooking. Okay, that's going to take our providers. Nice. So get providers. Let's be more explicit here and say get providers object here. Yeah, why not? Let's have a quick run. We'll save. We'll get ShowById and we'll hit run. Okay, so our providers are separated into their rates. It also has a link that allows us to go to the shows that we can watch. If you click on this, it'll tell you, oh, look, here's the shows. And it'll say all the providers. So who's streaming, who's buying. So we sort of want to do a Google Sheets version of this, right? So let's head back. Let's go back to our API interface. Mosey on up to the get providers we just created. We're going to put in some JS doc here to explain how everything's separated. Okay. So it helps us fill things out a bit easier. You can pause this and copy it in yourself. Let's get into it. So we need to say, if there isn't a provider object, then there's no providers. So we could say if, just have a look at our link. So there should be a bunch of types. So we've got flat rate here, we've got buy, but if we have a look at our sheet, you can see we've got free, buy, flat rate, and ads. So it's only showing when there's stuff available. So let's head back to our object here. And so we need to identify this. So what we could do is say 2 things. First one, so if there isn't a providers object at all, we're going to say no providers. So if bink, so maybe if there aren't any providers at all, it just doesn't come up for that country. So if there's no provider object, we're going to do something. Or let's say if it only shows this link, and that's it, then there's nothing in there either. There's no providers. So we could say object keys providers object dot length is less than or equal to 1. Then we are going to return no providers. And we want to display that in our sheet to say, hey, you haven't got any providers here, you can't get it in Australia or your country. And then we also want to grab that cool URL. So we want to grab the const URL is equal to provider object dot link. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. So we put it here. Yep, so link is completing. Nice. What we need to do is iterate over the different provider types. So we have a look at our execution log. We've got a flat rate, we've got buy, but we've also got two other rates, free and I've had a mental blank. free, buy, flat rate, and with ads. So let's do that. So we can go const providers string, we'll call it. And here we're going to iterate over our string of providers. What we might do here is put this in our enumerator, because we might use this for something else in the future. Who knows? So let's call this provider types array. And that's going to be equal to an array as we describe, which has free. And these are the terms that are used in the API. Buy. So if we need to update them, we can just quickly go here and fix them up. Flat rate at. Nice. And while we're at it, let's create our shortcut, our shorthand single letter. Now you can put this into a provider types object and split it up into name, letter, or do it this way. Up to you. And types letter array. And that's going to be equal to this. Now, if you're doing it this way, they need to match. So the first one is going to be F, comma, B for buy, R, flat rate, because we can't have duplicates, and then A for ads. Hit save, go back to our interface. That's okay, you're forgiven. Okay, so we're here. So now we're going to go refs.api, call this provider types array. We're going to iterate over this bad boy with a reduce. Okay, and our reduce is going to take an accumulator, the type, and then an index. Okay, and that's going to be equal to this. But we need to say, how do we want this to start? And we want to start, just want to start this with an empty string for this one. I think that'll work. Okay, cool. So now we want to check if the provider object has that property of the type. Then we want to add all the providers in there. So we'll say if providers object dot has own property. Is it providers object? Oh, provider. Oh, that's why we're not getting completion. It hates us. D. Okay. Now you're going to complete properly for me. Okay, provider object has own property. Okay, and that property needs to be the type we have up here, which is one of these types array. So if it has that type, I'm going to do some stuff. So first we're going to create a providers group. So const providers group is equal to provider object would be the type dot reduce, and that is going to take another accumulator. So this is now going to be iterating over the provider object by its type. Okay, so the flat rate by ads, etc. So now we're going to use another accumulator. So we'll call this accumulator 1, because it's going to have duplicates. And then the provider is the iterator, and then index 1. That's going to be equal to new space. And then what do we want to start off with here? We want to start off with the title. So that's going to look a little bit like this. And it's a shorthand, so we're going to say refs.api.letters array. And it's going to be the same as the index. So it's the same as this primary index up here. Okay, and then it's going to lead on with a space. It's going to list out all the providers by that type. So now we need to separate each of the providers in that row, and we'll use a spacer for that. So we'll go, so const spacer is equal to provider object type dot length minus 1 is equal to the index. Oh, 1, which should be index 1 up here. So if it is equal, then nothing happens, it's at the end. Otherwise, put in a little pipe. So space, pipe, space to separate the two. And then we're going to add this to accumulator 1. So ACC1 is plus equals string. And then we're going to add in our provider dot provider name. You can see here, provider name plus a spacer. Cool. So that'll give us a list of this like top row, the next top row, so on and so forth. All right, so that's done. Now it's a little paranoia save. Once we've got that list of all the providers in that current row, we're going to add them to our providers. So they'll be one underneath the other. So let's go accumulator ACC plus equals provider group. Whoop, provider group. Oh, I did something weird here too. Providers group, should say. Plus, and we're going to say refs API dot providers type array dot length -1. If it's equal to the index, then nothing. Otherwise, so if it's at the end, we're going to create a new line. Oh, didn't do my all convention here. Nice. And then finally, we're going to return this ACC accumulator to build this string. Finally, we're going to connect this to a hyperlink. So if you have a look in the sheet here, you can see hyperlink here, and that's all generated one underneath the other, and it's all linking to the same location. Now, I hummed and hawed about this thinking, okay, maybe this is an interface information and it could be put in the actual process instead of the interface connecting to the API. But in the end, I just went with this. Of course, you know what? I'm building it for me, not anyone else. Okay, so let's go equals hyperlink thingy, double quotation marks in here, and it's going to contain a URL up here. So I'm going to go URL. Oh, let's move our mouse out of the way. Oh, it's not capital though. URL is the first command for that string. And then we also want to add in our provider string. So that's going to be in double quotation marks too, because this is a Google Sheets function. So $, again, provider, what is it? String. Cool, done. All right. Let's see how we went. Hit save, go to a test, and have a crack. Right. Oh, we've got some undefined action going on there. Not great. Okay, let's go back to our interface here. Have a look. Go back to our test, see what happens. Oh, hyperlink, good. So be Apple TV, Amazon, and then Amazon Prime, Foxtel, Now Binge, Amazon Prime. And we should be able to see this here. Prime, Foxtel for stream, and buy. Awesome. Success. Okay, so we've got the two elements we need. So the last little bit we're going to do for this tutorial is jump down to here. So we're in an iterator. And we're going to build out an object that we're going to, next tutorial, use to fill this out. We're going to get the basic information that's going to help us fill this out. Okay, so let's do that. So we're going to say shows array object push, and what are we going to push? We're going to push an object, and it's going to contain our errors, of which there would be none by the time we get here. And then we want our response, and that's going to contain a child object. First we need our ID, so it's going to be shows.id, and shows.id is, remember, coming from here, so we can just, let's just perhaps console log that again. We'll just say shows. Okay, back to our test, hit run. Cool, so this is our shows portion here, remember? And we want the shows ID. So that would be the shows ID there. And then we want also to grab the poster path. So if we have a look, F poster path, there's another one that we need. And then we also want the show name. Okay, so don't want the original name, we just want the name, Mr. Robot here. So we'll get that far first, eh? Let's just do that first. So shows ID, we said the poster path is equal to, now remember the poster path was just the first bit. We have a look at those execution logs and search for poster path again. It's just the endpoint. So we need to add in the other part to it. Fortunately, in our previous tutorial, we already had done that. So I think we have it up here. It's either that or it's in our refs there. Cool, it's in our refs. Nice. So poster path is going to be equal to our refs.api.image URL plus the shows.poster path. Cool. Then we want to add the name, which is going to be shows.name. Then we want to add the season episode array we generated. So season episode, so the array. And that's going to be equal to season ep array. Sweet. And then the last episode we want. We also want the last show aired. So we know if the whole program has been finished. So all seasons and episodes, or we still got more to watch. We probably also want the home page, the providers, which we can now grab from our provider string, and our timestamp that we created up the top here. Well, the way up here. Yeah, eventually. Perhaps we could have put it down. It's okay. Okay, so last episode, let's have a quick look at our log. Looking for last, Control F. Here, last episode to air, last air date. That's the one there. So we'll go shows, last air date. Oh, it's the last air date, so it's this one, sorry. It's going to go there. And then last episode, let's get that up again. It's going to be found in our season episode array, isn't it? So we can go season episode array, and it's going to be the last item in that array. So we'll say season episode array dot length -1. And that'll be it. Homepage, however, is going to be shows dot, I think it's just homepage. Let's just double check. Yeah, homepage. Copy. Paste. Good. Providers and timestamp. We're done. And that's going to spit forth this. Hit save. Okay. Cool. So I don't think we need these anymore. Don't need that. I think we're okay. Let's go to our test. Not use that one. We'll just use a console log. And see what happens. We may need to stringify. I think. We will. So we'll say JSON stringify response. Come on. Blip blip. And we want null and blip blip. Maybe not with that though. Close that off. Good. Let's see what happens. Look. Excellent. That's amazing. There's our response. Post, path, name, seasons are all there. Last episode. Good. That's that one. Last show air date, homepage, providers in our happy little hyperlink. Timestamp. Yeah. Cool bananas. All right. So that's where we're at. For you, the inner coder, that was super fun, I'm sure. But now we need to put it in our Google Sheets because it's going to be our user interface for our users. So we're going to use what's returned from that in the next tutorial to populate this. So in the next tutorial, we are going to create this sheet. We're going to add a show, but we're not going to use the interface for that at the moment. And then we're going to use a complete. So we're going to do something here where we're done. We're going to hit complete. It's going to wipe it from here and it's going to put it in our watched list here. And that's it. Okay, so stay tuned. So if you like this tutorial, please hit that like button. And if you want to see more tutorials like this, please subscribe. And if you want to find out when the next tutorial in this series comes out, click on that notification bell. Until next time.